Farm Basics is brought to you by the Liberty Link trait and Liberty herbicide from Bayer. The most reliable weed management solution, Liberty Link and Liberty herbicide are the link to efficient row crop production and sustainable weed management.
During our Farm Basics time today, we wanted to discuss keeping stored grain. Now this year was a little different. I'm sure you're aware, if you're a non-farmer, that there were some problems around the country. We had drought in many areas of the United States, and so the crop yields were less than normal, which means that farmers have to store less grain than normal. But there were some problems with that grain that makes storing grain a challenge, even though there were fewer bushels.
Well, when you look at corn, for example, many of the drought-stressed areas had some issues with aflatoxin. And if you've got a mold, like aflatoxin is going to be coming from a mold, you're going to have some issues in your bin with that mold spreading if you have moisture or if you have too much heat. So it's very important on corn to make sure the temperature of stored corn is down below 40 degrees. You don't want to freeze the corn, yet you want to keep it as cool as you possibly can.
Yeah, but you could freeze it. What's wrong with freezing it?
Well, it's kind of like your refrigerator. You want it to be cool, but you don't want it to be frozen.
Why?
Now, once you have corn that's frozen, you're going to bring out a whole different set of challenges. Once that corn is below freezing, now you're going to have some issues as it thaws out. You could potentially have some moisture issues developing, those kind of things. If you can keep it above freezing, that's where we have the least amount of problems with insects and also with moisture.
Yeah, and that's really what I was trying to get at there, Darren, is to get you to save moisture, because if the grain freezes, then as things are thawing out, there's moisture that's going to come out of that, moisture that's going to end up in your bin, and that can be very problematic, because as a farmer, what you're trying to have is grain that has a low level of moisture, and then keep that grain cool. So if it's cool with a low level of moisture, you don't have a lot of problems, usually.
Well, and the other side of that is if the grain kernels are whole and if the test weight is high, we rarely have problems. But when we have low test weight, as we had in some areas, or we have damaged or cracked kernels, as we did, because many guys were harvesting that corn when it may have been 10 to 12% moisture in some of these drought areas, now it's really hard not to crack up those kernels as you're taking them off the ears.
Well, you've talked a lot about corn, but with soybeans, it's the exact same issue. Soybean moisture got so low so quick because it was very dry, very arid climate we had this early fall when harvest was going on. So there were a lot of soybeans that got cracked up, put into bins, and whenever grain is damaged like that, whether it's corn or soybeans or any type of grain, that's a problem. It's just opened up for much more disease issues, and it's also easier for insects to feed on.
Well, the other thing that happened this early harvest is it was really warm, and much of the grain that was coming in may have been 90 degrees going into the bins. And when it's hot in the middle of the day and sunny and you've got warm grain going into the bins, it's important to have aeration fans to pull some of that heat out of those bins and replace it with cooler temperatures. Now, we've got some temperature monitoring cables in some of our bins, and we've been watching those throughout the fall just to see that our corn that went in that we ran through our grain dryer, for example, to make sure we got that cooled down in our bins, or just the grain that was coming straight out of the field and into bins was getting cooled down as well.
Okay, so it's temperature sensing equipment. What we can determine a lot of times is if we find a hot spot in a bin, that means that grain is starting to spoil. It's starting to go bad. And so we can see, because of this monitoring system that we've got now in a couple of our bins, I mean, it's awesome. You can just look it up on the internet, and I can check anywhere from, I can be on vacation somewhere, Darren, and I can still be looking it up.
Well, that's not unusual for you, Brian, so it is important that we can check that from other areas. You can look at the top of the bin. Many farmers will open the tops of their bins and smell what the grain smells like, and, oh, it smells fine. It doesn't smell like it's heating up or anything.
Yeah, but it's a lot more accurate to have these monitors.
There could be a small problem developing way down deep in the bin that you may not sense up at the top.
Well, once again, we just wanted to discuss stored grain, especially if you're a non-farmer. We just wanted you to understand what the farmer has to go through when he's going to hold on to this grain from fall until next summer, because there are a lot of farmers that will hold grain all the way till next summer. I mean, let's face it, somebody has to hold on to the grain next summer because there's tremendous demand come summer. And how much grain are we producing, how much corn and soybeans are we producing that gets harvested in June or July in this country? None. So we've got to hold on to some as farmers.
Well, there's certainly a lot of challenges in the grain bin to protect that grain, but there's also a lot of challenges in the field, like our weed of the week. Can you identify this week's weed?